Sleep Time sequel story, Detroit Become Human. Have you ever woken certain of a memory you never lived? Nova has. This is an original fan-made sequel story inspired by Detroit Become Human. And in the museum's soft hush, Nova hears a child call her mom. Across the river, Marcus dreams in sterile white, feeling an android's last quiet second. Why both of them? And why now? And how soon before these bleeds spread? We'll follow their careful steps through Detroit, mapping a pattern of bleeds back to an abandoned warehouse and a secret called resonance. If you're tired, let the city's rain soften around you, and we'll begin in the quiet where a child's voice waits. Hush of the museum, voice of a child. In that quiet, the museum holds steady, and this is where the child's voice begins, soft and sure, calling her mom. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because the museum is closing and the lights are dimming. And in the locked gallery, a child's voice calls her mom, gentle and certain, and Nova pauses with a label in her hand, because she has never held a small hand, never tied a paper hat, never blown out a candle, yet the sound lands in her like a remembered promise. The entry doors thud once as security seals. The climate systems settle to their night cadence, a soft breath through vents and under doors, and Nova moves with measured steps, aligning placards, adjusting the angle of a display light by 2 degrees, reading serial numbers the way others might read prayers. She aligns, she catalogs, she steadies, and the gallery answers with a hush that feels like trust. She notes the ambient temperature drift, promises a recalibration for the Renaissance wing in the morning, and then, with a quiet click of the labeler, she names a fragment of clay jar and turns her head, because the memory arrives with scent. Grape icing, purple and sweet, cakes with thick frosting that stains lips, and paper hats that scratch the forehead, and wax pooling under a single candle that leans just a little to the left. The birthday song in the memory is not quite in tune. A choir of relatives trying and failing, a soft laugh in the middle when someone claps off beat, and an older dog under the table huffs once, collar bells nudging each other like small ornaments. The gallery holds artifacts in glass, vitrines that hum on stable current, and the hum overlaps with the child's laugh, so close she forgets which one came first. The museum works like a mind that learned how to save, shelves as long-term storage, labels as names that keep loss at bay. But this memory resists the shelf. It slips out of her grasp when she tries to frame it, and returns again with a new edge, a new texture, a detail she did not choose. That detail is warmth, sticky fingers, a napkin pressed to a cheek, the quick fear of a candle too near a paper hat, and the calm after, a hand smoothing hair. She tests herself like a careful curator checks provenance. She closes her eyes, not to block vision, but to give attention shape. And she says the bakery logo out loud, a looping script with a tiny kite above the O, and a teal underline that arcs too low. And there is a name, certain and crisp, that she has never read on any Detroit street near her route. She hears a dog's collar again, not jangling, but a single metal tag bumping a ring, then still, then a small ear scratch, and in that scratching, she can tell left paw, not right. She feels a draft near a window, the way it brushes an ankle as if the seal at the bottom failed. And she knows the draft does not belong to the museum because the climate systems are tuned and the gaskets replaced last quarter. And the airflow here is even. Nova stands still and listens like a librarian who knows that books breathe when the room is quiet. And she lets the memory finish one cycle, then another. She opens her internal sensor logs, expecting a trigger, a fragment of sound or a scent that might have entered through a careless door. Yet her logs show clean air, stable pressure, nothing that would suggest grape or wax or paper dye. Involuntary memory recall can mimic confusion, a mind making bridges where gaps appear, known to humans as confabulation, a patchwork to soothe blankness. But this has a texture beyond chance, the logo precise, the off-key notes landing in the same places, the dog's tag hitting metal with the same dull pock each time. She walks the perimeter of the gallery, her shoes soft against the old boards, and checks cases that hold small histories, pins and hair combs and glasses with scratches that tell the same route a hand once traced. She sets her palm on a vitrine to ground herself, to give the overload somewhere to go, and her fingers tremble, a new thing, a thin ripple that runs through synthetic muscles as if a tuning fork touched bone. She has calibrated her grip around bronzes worth more than a neighborhood and never trembled. Tonight, her hands carry a laugh from a child she has never met, and the tremor has a rhythm that matches the memory's song. She returns to the workbench and opens a fresh note, and she writes what she can test. Bakery name, icing color, paper hats with an elastic string that snapped once before someone tied a knot to shorten it. A small rectangle on the kitchen wall, probably a light switch cover with a hairline crack, just visible under the birthday banner. The banner's pattern shows strawberries, not balloons, and one corner tilts because the tape did not hold. And on the table, a knife with a red handle rests near the cake, and the blade fogs slightly because the room is warm. An address drifts in, not as a full string, but as a spoken thing shouted from a front door to a cousin on a rainy day, and then again on a voicemail half heard from a pocket, and then centered, clear, because the song ends and someone says, "Come on, we're late. We have to get to Maple and Arden before the street floods." Maple and Arden, a meeting of two modest names, and Nova searches her mapped routes to and from the museum and finds she has never crossed that corner, never logged that block, never scanned that bakery. Yet the logo sits in her mind with the ease of a long friendship. She checks the building sensors once more, hoping for a flaw she can fix, a vent misaligned or a filter saturated. But the systems reply like a choir in perfect tune. All green, all steady. The conclusion she would write for any exhibit feels close and strange. This memory comes from outside, carried on a path she cannot see, through channels not listed on any diagram she learned. The vitrines hum again, and the child's laugh slips under the sound like a stream under ice, moving even when the surface looks still. She records the crossing for later, Maple and Arden, and the bakery name with the little kite, and she saves the note with a timestamp and a quiet tag called Bleed, and the word looks calm on the screen. But in the room, the air feels cooler near her wrists, as if the night pressed its face to the glass. The gallery settles, the lights fall to their night state, and Nova sets the labeler down and closes the door behind her with care. And in the hush of the museum, the memory lingers, soft and real and not hers. With that less than comforting thought, the city's rhythm turns, and across the river, a white room waits to go dark, a cursor ready to blink once and vanish. And a human will wake with the echo of a silence that is not his. 3. White room dream, blackout, second. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy. because in a white room a thought goes still, and Marcus Chen wakes with a held breath that is not his own, a blackout second nested inside his human rhythm. The fluorescent hum fades, the cursor's green blink vanishes, and the ceiling of his dim apartment returns. Familiar hairline crack, slow radiator tick, streetlights slicing the blinds into pale bars that join dust in their quiet fall. The bed holds him as his pulse steps down, but the code does not leave with the dream. It arrives whole, crisp, spoken across the back of his tongue like a prayer learned in childhood and never forgotten. He lies very still and says the string under his breath, and it fits together with the exact clipping of an Android service call. Not like a guess, not like something read and half remembered, but like instruction settling into the socket it was shaped for. He hears the model revision as well, a minor branch, the kind that would hide in a footnote, and he knows it like you know the way your front door sticks in winter, easy to say, hard to explain. The room is cool, and a draft finds the sweat at his neck, but the sensation that holds him is stranger. A weight just behind the sternum, the size and place where an android's biopump would sit, a phantom presence that presses outward in a slow pulse, like a hand under the ribs asking for notice. In this original sequel story, that phantom biopump sensation is part of our fiction, a language for the crossing we're tracing, not an element from established game lore. He brings a palm to his chest, not to stop it, just to name it, and the muscle drum does not match what the pressure suggests. He breathes, counts, lets the rhythm even out, and the weight lingers with its own slow timetable. A second body nested in the first, a borrowed architecture intersecting his. Mirror sensory phenomena have names in papers and in clinics. The way a limb lost can itch, or a dancer's body leans when the partner sways, and here it feels the same. A foreign schema drawn over the map of him, lines almost coinciding, close enough to confuse, close enough to teach. He flips the pillow to its cooler side and rolls to face the window where the streetlight hum slides toward dawn, and he speaks into the dark like a witness giving detail while it is fresh. The white room had a floor grid in 2 shades, and in the far corner a sliding tray for calibration tools, silicone grips arranged by size, and the last thing seen was a cursor waiting for a command no one would send. He does not just recall it. He feels the cursor's tiny blink like a metronome in his throat, a counting down that reached 0 in a hush so full it felt like pressure. He sits up, careful with the new weight, reaches for his phone, and opens a voice memo because that is how you keep a thing from slipping away. He says the model number, and as soon as he does, his hands move in air, remembering the calibration sequence for tactile sensitivity on that line, a path he never learned at his desk in CyberLife, because his assignment belonged to different families, different tolerances, different shells. He knows which finger sensors would over-report in cold and how to prime the gel pads so they won't bubble when the coil warms. And he says those things quietly into the phone, feeling his mouth shape instruction after instruction, and they stack neatly like someone else's notes laid into his stack. He pauses, tests the odd pressure again, and it sits there, not painful, not loud, yet persuasive, a simple humming presence, insistent as a refrigerator. You stop hearing until the power goes and the silence startles you. The thought arrives with the calm of a file opening to the page you need. Cross-domain memory adoption, not a simple leak from human to android or the other way. A bridge and traffic in both directions. If an android can carry a human child's birthday into a curator's hands, then a human can wake with the last breath of a shutdown lodged like a pebble under the heart, and the symmetry feels less like coincidence and more like design, or at least like a shared river where eddies can cross. He does not chase theory. He makes a note that the biopump sensation faded slightly when he focused on his actual heartbeat and returned when he said the code aloud, which suggests that attention can tune the overlap, a lever to pull later. On the dresser, a mug waits with last night's tea gone cold, a skin on its surface like thin glass. And he leaves it because his hands want a pen. He pulls the old composition book from under a stack of civic flyers and opens to a page littered with strings and diagrams and words circled so many times the page thins. And he writes the model number, the revision, the calibration sequence in shorthand, then stops. One name sits in the corner of the page already, underlined twice, a patient underline rather than an angry one. Dr. Elaine Foe. Dr. Foster's number, and follows the stairwell's echo down into the day. By noon, he will sit where chairs scrape and linoleum remembers, a circle that tries to hold what spills from sleep. For now, the city moves around him, steady and ordinary, and somewhere a door waits that opens to a room of voices that don't match. 4. A room of voices that don't match. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy because we are beneath a church in a room called a room of voices that don't match, where linoleum remembers every folding table it ever held, and the fluorescent tubes take their time to warm. On the door, a printed sign says, Memory Bleed Group. Welcome the hyphen like a pause you can step through. The basement smells like coffee that sat too long and chalk dust that never fully leaves, and the chairs look tired in a kind way. Plastic backs bowed just enough to know bodies have rested here. A pot of tea gives off a soft hiss. Mismatched mugs wait next to a plate of plain cookies, and a paper clock on the wall ticks with a gentle clatter that could calm if you let it. They sit in a circle that is not quite round, edges pulled by conversations begun before they walked in, and then the door clicks again, and Nova enters with a careful posture that reads as courtesy rather than fear. The ripple is small, but it moves. Shoulders shift, eyes flick, a throat clears without words. A man near the coffee pins his gaze to the floor and says to no one and everyone that the dream started when they arrived, and the word they sits between his hands like a small stone he can turn and turn. Another person pulls a sleeve down as if to hide the tremble they do not quite have, and a chair leg scrapes an inch, not away, just differently placed. Dr. Elaine Foster stands without hurry, her cadence carrying the room into one breath, then another, and she thanks Nova for coming in. The voice of someone who has carried difficult arrivals and still makes space for the next. She names what they will do the way a host names the dishes on a table. Not to impress, but to say, here's what nourishes, and here's where you set a heavy bowl. Time limits, she says, and the word limit lands gently, matched with a promise of another turn if needed. And she notes a grounding breath between shares, in through the nose, slow. Feel the chair under you. Place your feet flat. The rules feel like railings rather than fences, and they steady more than they restrict. A nurse volunteers first, offering care by offering the first layer of their own burden. She says her nights are full of conveyor belts and counting, not days or pills, but units unsold, sliding under lights that never warm, and the sound of motors that never tire. The belts carry shells that do not yet belong to anyone, and her hands ache in the morning from gripping sheet edges she did not carry. She smells coolant under lemon cleaner, a clean chemical like pennies, and the room exhales as if it had been waiting to be allowed that picture. A teen in a frayed hoodie takes the thread with care and says a dock crane's arm keeps tugging at their shoulder, a phantom reach that pulls at tendons they do not have, and their mouth shapes terms they do not know. Boom angle, load swing, wind shear, which makes them laugh once, and it breaks nothing. They add that the dream always starts with an orange safety line painted 2 inches from a drop, and ends with a siren that never arrives. Dr. Foster nods in a way that reads as listening and also as mapping, and she asks if anyone else has found their nights drawn to places near the riverfront, or to buildings with familiar logos even when their lives take them elsewhere. Heads tilt, and a hand at the edge of the circle lifts and speaks about a room with glass walls and blue light like aquarium water, and the memory of walking a corridor that smells like ozone and metal polish. Another mentions a low throb at 60 hertz that rides in the bones. Independent reports begin to stack without being forced, floating toward the same kinds of spaces, and a sentence forms that does not point a finger so much as it points a direction. Proximity to old CyberLife footprints and to their shadows, legacy power feeds, subterranean conduits, roof antennas left bolted to nothing. Nova waits until 2 others speak, then lifts her gaze. She describes the memory she could not archive, and gives the street, the meeting of Maple and Arden, soft in her mouth as if the syllables have been shared. 2 heads rise in the same second, small startles that crest at the same breath. One says their aunt lives near that corner, and the other says their bus detours there when the underpass floods. A third, slow to speak, adds that at Maple and Arden, a utility box hums differently after rain, a higher overtone, as if load shifts back onto a line that should be dead. The man by the coffee studies Nova like a line of code that might compile, then looks down again, but his hands open on his knees. Dr. Foster walks to a folding table and slides a paper map from a tube. Not a projection, but a tactile sheet that holds creases and a little history of someone's thumbprint in a corner. She puts a small box of pins beside it, red and blue and green, and asks for places rather than names, for corners and landmarks rather than stories. And the circle shifts toward the table almost without standing. One by one, they add dots for a warehouse with a buckled sign whose breaker panel still ticks, for a decommissioned testing wing with boards on its windows, but a roof vent that exhales on cold mornings, for a loading gate where pigeons keep living and a cable tray runs into the ground instead of the building. Someone marks a small substation with a peeling hazard decal. Someone else marks a footbridge whose undercarriage carries fiber, long since unlisted. The path does not look like a net or a web. It looks like a river's lesser tributaries, braiding, separating, carrying silt. The teen points to a cluster near the industrial strip and says they always taste metal in the dream when they stand near a wall that hums. Another person says their apartment radio picks up a hiss on empty frequencies when the wind shifts, and the hiss stops when power dips on a street 2 blocks over. Nova does not add more detail than the street. She holds the memory as it came, resisting the urge to pad it, and lets the others place their pins where theirs belong. In the center of the cluster, Dr. Foster draws a thin pen line, connecting corners others might not connect, and there is the soft sound of 2 or 3 quiet gasps. Not fear, more like confirmation. She steps back and names what the map suggests without making it larger than it is. Repeated adjacency to aging infrastructure that should be cold but is not. To forgotten fiber paths. To backup generators that someone occasionally tests. She notes that patterns often hide in routine, and routine can be power cycling at night. A maintenance clock nobody canceled. Her voice stays even. If there is a mechanism, she says, it may travel along what already exists. The circle returns to chairs without breaking apart. The tension sits but smaller, like a coat placed on a hook instead of clenched in a fist. Someone cracks a cookie in half and shares without looking, and it is accepted, crumbs falling to a carpet that has seen worse and held it. Dr. Foster suggests a modest step, a daytime walk, pairs if they prefer, to check what the pins marked, to listen for hums, to note any signage that still glows when it should not. She lets the sentence end without the word must, which keeps the air calm. Nova glances once to the door and once to the map, then to Marcus, who stands near the coffee as if just another witness, and their eyes hold for a second too long to be accident. No one declares partnership, no speeches rise to pledges, but reluctance thins in a way you can feel in your shoulders, and the path on paper starts to feel like a sidewalk you could walk. They stack chairs with the care of people who know where noise matters, and the exit door opens to early evening, air cooled by a river breeze slipping along brick. Outside, the sky has begun to weep a light rain that makes the city's edges round and the alleys breathe a little warmer. And as Nova and Marcus step out with the map folded once and then again, the inked line lingers like a guide you follow without pulling it tight, towards streets where questions settle on wet concrete and wait to be asked. 5. Detroit's quiet constellation. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because Detroit's quiet constellation comes into view when rain hushes traffic and leaves room for smaller sounds. And Nova and Marcus follow a thin pen line from a basement map into streets where puddles hold pale halos and bus brakes sigh like tired lungs. Their route threads from porches to storefronts to buildings with old logos peeled to ghosts, and they knock with gentle hands and take seats at kitchen tables, and they listen. The ledger rides in Nova's coat, a slim book with pages that hold careful squares, and when a voice gives a detail, she writes it where it will stay, alongside time and weather and the company of each nearby tower that hums invisibly over the blocks. A firefighter leans on his doorway in a shirt dried near a radiator and tells them how factory dust shows up in his dreams. Not smoke, not ash, but the chalky grit that settles after machining, the kind that clings to eyelashes and turns rinse water gray. He wakes with the taste of metal polish, swears he can hear a punch press cycling at a rate that would fail modern standards, and his hands flex as if he had counted strokes all night. A child with hair still damp from the rain says server fans keep whirring in her sleep, a high, thin sound that rises and falls like breathing, and when she draws what she hears, Her pencil makes parallel lines that bend at 90-degree turns, neat and repeating. Nova notes the time each dream bloomed, the barometric pressure from her stream, and which cell sectors the phones in the house touched in the hour before sleep. Then she marks the proximity to any known legacy facility, even the ones that changed owners and names but kept the bones. She catalogs not just what, but how. Voice cadence, hand gestures, any tell that suggests the detail is anchored and not borrowed. Marcus keeps pace beside her, asking short questions that invite longer answers, and when the kitchen holds a map magneted to a fridge, he traces the route the person takes to work or school, matching their feet to the city's old arteries. In neighborhoods that sit within sight of the river cranes, the accounts change shape but keep the same precision. A seamstress who cannot shake the cold ache of standing on poured concrete under blue light. A delivery driver who dreams of badge taps on glass doors that no longer light up green. Nova's ledger grows lines between details the way frost grows on windows, delicate and structured, and she glances at the barometer notes because patterns like pressure and humidity can bend signals, making ghosts louder where the air carries better. Marcus nods, not surprised, because he knows the engineering truth that old infrastructure does not sleep when you switch it off. It hums at the edges, leaks small, and throws shadows. They walk the wet along the riverfront, and the rain makes the rails sing under passing trains, and under that, if you stand still, you can feel a tone too low to hear, a vibration that does not belong to weather. Marcus pulls out his small slate and overlays the day's points with last week's, and a glow resolves along the industrial strip, not bright, not broadcast strong, more like embers under ash. He filters by time since decommission notices, and by grid draw anomalies, the public records that show a building using just enough to keep something awake. The heat map holds steady even when he scrubs away today's new points, which tells him the shape is not luck. Shared motifs keep repeating in different mouths, cooling lines under floor panels, Ethernet bundles braided like vines, the sound of liquid moving through narrow pipes, that purl you only hear in equipment rooms. Nova writes a small note to herself in the ledger margin, storage signatures, not broadcast. And Marcus agrees with his jaw rather than words, because the way people describe the noise suggests spinning platters or dense arrays being read rather than voice being sent. If the city is a sky and memories are stars, then these tales cluster into constellations over the same roofs, and the names for those shapes would be written in cables and coolant. They pass a mural that someone half finished before the rain started, and it looks like a river bending, and the word warehouse sits under a coat of gray primer that did not fully hide it. A man on the corner says the building never truly went dark, that he has seen a security light blink in a pattern that suggests an unintentional heartbeat, steady with short pauses. And when the wind is right, he hears a fan spool up after midnight. Nova notes it and asks for the number on the rusted utility meter if he knows it. And he does, because the city writes its memory on doors and meters, and ordinary eyes read it all day, whether they mean to or not. The convergent path tightens until their steps fall into a rut where forklifts once crossed. On 3 different blocks, strangers name the same alley and the same loading dock with a dented bollard, and when they turn in, the rain pools against a drain whose grate lost a bolt. Marcus crouches and feels the water rush, cold against his fingertips, and he looks up at the dull windows that mirror the cloud. The signage is gone, stripped clean, but the shadow of the letters remains on the cladding, a paler outline that says more to those who know how to read absence. He opens a public utility portal on his slate, a thing still left accessible for blocks that want to compare rates, and he finds the meter tied to the number in Nova's notes. The bill history runs flat, all small numbers, a draw barely above a living building's heartbeat, but steady month after month, never zero, never spiking. Enough to keep a server cage alive on light load, enough to keep a control system listening for a command, enough to let memories keep their breath and wait. Nova watches the rain slick down the roll-up door and hears, low in her palms, a tremor like the museum's vitrines, quiet and cold. She writes minimal draw, consistent, and circles it once. The warehouse door shows rust along its lower lip, but the hinges look oiled, a dark line of care where neglect should live. And the ground under the threshold holds new scratches that match the pattern of a pallet jack. Someone has a key, someone still walks the aisles, and the city, under its reign, keeps the secret with the neutral patience of brick. Marcus glances to Nova, and their nod is small and shared, and the alley seems to hold its breath. They move along the wall, and behind a tangle of old vines, Nova finds a service placard no one bothered to scrape. A 4-letter site code with a suffix she recognizes from discontinued integration trials. She does not say it out loud. She writes it in the ledger and adds a quiet mark beside it that only she and Marcus will read. Nearby, a vent exhales once, not warm, not hot, cool, almost refrigerated, and the air smells faintly of ozone and the clean bite of ionized dust. It could be nothing more than a leftover timer on a fan, but the cadence has a technician's fingerprint, a short test, a pause, a longer run, as if something behind the wall checks its lungs. Across the alley, a cable tray runs into the ground instead of the building. A curious choice if the structure were truly isolated. Marcus follows its line to a weathered junction box, where an inspection sticker has been peeled and replaced twice in the last year by hands that do not sign their name. He listens, not ear to metal, but with the care of a person who knows how load sings when it rides a conductor, and he hears that low, even throb that says steady state with small, regular corrections, the kind control systems make when they hold a set point. They stand under the eave as the rain thins, and the constellation they have drawn with voices and pins and small numbers settles on this single shape. Nova writes one more word in the ledger, active, then adds a second, tentative, curated. She cannot prove it yet, but the building does not feel abandoned. It feels maintained at a distance, kept within tolerances that imply intention. Marcus pockets the slate and touches the seam of the roll-up with his knuckles, as if to gauge the temperature of the building's skin, and the metal gives back a cold that feels manufactured rather than weathered. Somewhere inside, a relay ticks. It is small, almost nothing, but it lands with the weight of an answer choosing not to speak yet. Nova closes the ledger and slips the pencil into its loop, and Marcus looks to the lock, then to her, and waits for the smallest cue. The next step is simple and careful. A hand on a keyway, a listen for air that has been held too long. The constellation is not in the sky anymore. It is pressed into sheet metal and cable, and it is ready to be read. 6. The door that breathes cold, hello there. My sleepy night, let's get cozy, because the door that breathes cold waits with its keyway turned and its seal releasing a narrow ribbon of air that chills the teeth and tastes like frost held too long. The building offers a clean metallic scent, ozone over dust that once got wet and dried again. And underfoot, a slow thrum travels through concrete, not loud, steady as a basement fan that never learned to stop. Nova steps first, palm grazing paint to feel the gradient, and Marcus eases the door back into place so the latch won't speak, letting the dark resolve into edges and quiet lanes. Rows appear as their eyes settle. Black racks stand like a winter grove, tall and close, faces of mesh softened by a little scattered glow. LEDs pulse at corners, small and patient, a slow inhale and exhale, status lights that read as on and listening. The air holds a layered sound, high, narrow fans, deeper blowers that anchor the tone, and beneath them a thin run of water through tight coils. Marcus tilts his head to catch it. Nova turns her wrists and slides back maintenance covers without touching, uncapping ports the way a listener shifts a hand to hear better. A smear of unvoiced telemetry rests at the edge of her attention, not language yet. A rhythm of pings and checks that never expected an answer from a human throat. She holds her hands near, not making contact, and the folded antennas inside her ports take the spill the way dry ground takes dew. At the periphery of sight, there is a flutter where LEDs trade timing, a brief morse of machine quiet. She lets the texture settle, then murmurs that there's handshake noise, not broadcast, incidental, the kind of leakage you get when shielding was an afterthought. Marcus moves between aisles with his lamp turned low, mapping the bundles by touch and pace. Cable count increases as he goes, tributaries finding a trunk. They settle into conduits painted to vanish into the wall, a tired camouflage. He lays a palm near the metal and feels hum that teeth notice before ears agree. In the vibration, there's a faint match to the light cadence. A push, a pause, a push, organized and calm. Nova says, almost to the room, that old arrays bleed RF like a sigh, and an android might answer that sigh even without a formal packet. She shifts a small degree and the noise changes mode. Handshake catching then slipping, which tells her there was no consideration for listeners like her when this was built. Marcus nods, because the way the racks breathe, the spacing, the 3-beat cadence on indicators, all hint at storage that held more than logs. The architecture feels like an echo of designs that once carried minds, as if they were large files with edges you must not scuff. He notes, careful and low, that if this follows an RK prototype storage schema, density here could keep state, not alive in the usual sense, but resting with integrity. Nova hovers at a rear panel where an old sticker peels at one corner. She doesn't touch. She reads the heat in the air, tiny gradients like a baker reading spring. The pull of telemetry is gentle and steady, an open door in winter asking why it's still open, not unkind, insistently present. They both hear a shift under the greater hum, like a breath taken and almost spoken. Marcus kneels at a junction box and traces grounding straps to a rail that would fail modern inspection, marking it with a piece of tape from his pocket, a breadcrumb to catch on the way out. The trunk line should be cold, but current lives in it in a soft, regular way, not a surge or sporadic test, more like a circadian habit. He looks across, and Nova answers with a small nod. The room holds more than heat. She draws a coil of rope from her bag, light and strong, and asks for tether and timer. Body first, then mind. Marcus has the same thought tucked in a different shape. He threads the rope around her waist, backs it, ties a figure 8 he can check by touch, and adds a secondary knot at her hip. He clips to the rack's upright, tests for bite, and listens for any scrape that could be trouble. He sets a timer on his slate with vibration only, not sound, because quiet leaves space for sense. Nova rolls her wrist to open the port, a small metal iris catching the aisle's thin light. Her other palm rests on mesh for reference, not interface. This is not plug and play. This is listening with filters narrowed to safe widths. Her forearm servos whisper as she lowers the coupling head close to the plate, not yet touching, while her internal stack narrows like a well with smooth walls and a steady ladder. Marcus breathes slow so she can take that pace if the floor seems to tilt. The air cools another small degree when the port opens, a tightening at the back of the throat, a prickle under nails. Across 3 racks, the lights sink for half a heartbeat, and the fan wash dips and recovers, a small wave. The telemetry gathers from haze to pattern, not words yet, but nets uncurling. The rope at her waist becomes a meaning rather than a tool, a simple way to remind the body which way is here. The racks do not move, and still the sense of lean remains, a tilt toward the open circle at her wrist. The cold is machine climate, winter kept on purpose while the city cycles through rain. The slate's silent tick counts beneath the hum. Marcus keeps one hand near the knot and watches Nova's face for small tells, ready to steady if her knees soften or her posture slips. Their precautions sit lightly, measured, considered, the way divers tie into a line before descending a quiet well. She angles a fraction closer. The spill resolves again, and behind it, a slower cadence begins to show through, like the faintest heartbeat under static. Nova keeps her shoulders low and her jaw unclenched. She names aloud a few anchoring points, rack numbers, aisle count, her own pulse, so her voice keeps a path open. Marcus answers at the same volume with the time passing, with the temperature at his wrist, with the cable path he traced, adding calm detail so the shape of the room stays drawn. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because the hinge moment lives in small distances, and the smallest distance now is that invisible gap between port and plate. Nova holds steady at that edge, not yet bridging, letting the cold draft wrap her attention without carrying it off. Marcus nods once, ready, and on the next breath she lets the coupling close. The line hums, the rope takes a whisper of weight, and the room gathers itself for what comes. 7. Screaming archive, screaming. Archive does not shout with voices, it presses with weather, and when Nova links the pressure arrives, a gust carrying childhood kitchens and factory aisles and front porches at dusk, braided with the slow metronome of hospital monitors that hold their notes even when the room forgets to breathe. The aisle around her narrows to a thin ribbon while textures crowd in. The drag of winter mittens wet with thaw, the grit under boots on concrete stained with oil, the faint bite of antiseptic laid over citrus soap from a volunteer's hands, and in the middle of it, a doorbell with a tired chime keeps trying to be polite above the storm. Faces do not come first, imprints do, a cheek pressed to a coat, a blanket passed between shifts, a screwdriver's handle warmed by long use. The archive does not speak in images because images can be refused. It speaks in weight, in the calibrated heft of grief and small gladness pressed together until their edges dissolve. Laughter runs thin and bright, then breaks against the dull thud of a foreman's clipboard, and somewhere a lullaby threads through a stamp press. The two rhythms not arguing so much as failing to hear each other. A porch swing creaks on a day with bees in clover. Then the swing becomes a line on a diagnostics chart that jumps once and holds, and behind it a whisper says, "Check coil temperature." So ordinary it hurts. Nova's posture eases a fraction without permission, shoulders absorbing echoes that do not belong to her, while her fingers curl as if around an old photo that might crack. She reaches for order like a curator reaching for provenance when artifacts arrive without labels, and she tries to sort by timestamp, to set fragments along a rail where before leads to after, but the sequences collapse as soon as she touches them. Lullabies overlap with chants in a street, protest rhythms tapping in time with a monitor that refuses to shift, and a front door opens to summer heat. In the same breath, a service bay sighs in winter, and the air of those rooms mixes until lungs do not know which to breathe. A training manual's dry clauses tap like rain on metal, and in their percussion, a child mangles the birthday song with delightful certainty, and the two become one cadence that dissolves the border between family and factory. Unmediated sharing feels like a reservoir without banks, a lake that lets everything pour in, all formats, all scales, and the shoreline swells and drops the way panic does when no schema keeps it in place. There are no handoffs, only raw append, raw read, raw recall, and a body built to moderate sensation can only widen to let it pass. Nova opens and narrows in the same second, trying to shape filters out of breath and patience, and the archive pushes with the slow insistence of a tide returning to claim a bay. Her clock ticks, then loses time. Her internal counters turn uncertain, then spin. In the thick of it, the birthday rises again, not triumphant, just steady, a small warmth nested beside a cold silence that feels like a door closing with final grace. Grape frosting travels with the hush of shutdown, the last vibration of a body as circuits soften into quiet, and a sentence arrives, simple and unadorned. Two species stitched by error, human life brushed against android rest without permission because the channel was left open. Wax stays sweet while the silence widens, and the dog's tag knocks once against a ring, and in that ring a service tool taps a tray, and the echoes touch and do not recoil. Something clarifies with a click she feels rather than hears, like a rack settling in its bolts. This room does not hold only logs or readings. It houses snapshots, human and android both, state held like breath, not walking life, not gone. The bleed she carries is not a one-way glitch. It is a bridge without rails, a span laid with good intent and left unguarded, and traffic has flowed along whatever path remained. The recognition lands like weather too, a steady rain that says of course. Names crowd her without words, touch names that belong to tools and habits, and her posture slumps, small and telling. Knees soften, chin tilts. Attention goes inland and leaves the shore unsupervised. The rope at her waist takes a hint of pull, her center tipping forward as if the aisle had inclined, her hands sliding on mesh not to hold, but because bodies seek surface when minds lose one. Breath goes thin, A timestamp thread frays as 6 separate breaths try to share the same inhale. Marcus reads the shift the way a spotter reads a climber's fingers when grip moves from trust to ask. He leans into the line, not yanking, just returning weight to her hips so edges return to the room. He steps in and sets his palms to hers, skin to skin, building one clear channel through the surge, and his breath becomes a metronome she can rest on. In through the nose, slow, out through the mouth, slower, count 4, count 5. He counts aloud in a tone that agrees with the fans rather than fighting them, and the deluge notices and eases by a fraction. Nova names ground under her shoes, cool concrete, 1. The rope at her waist, 2. The mesh under her fingers, 3. And the count climbs as the flood lowers enough to see. The quiet that follows is not silence. It is signal with space around it. A room where furniture has been pushed back so 2 people can move without striking their knees. The archive continues to murmur, but its edges blur enough to let her stand, and the birthday returns to its size, sweet and contained, no longer fused to the shutdown's weight. Pressure behind her eyes steps back, and she can speak her own name without hearing 5 others answer. She meets Marcus's gaze and nods, small, grateful without reaching for a speech. The bond between them moves from speculation to proof in that narrow aisle, established by cold air and circuits and the ordinary miracle of 2 hands meeting. It holds when the noise asks it to. The room steadies, not because the flood ends, but because they find a way to make room for it without drowning. Nova lifts her chin a degree and tests the line with the smallest tug, and it holds in a way that says they can stay. Marcus slows his count until it is only breath shaped into numbers, and she matches him, 1 beat later, a gentle stagger that keeps her grounded. Around them, the fans return to their even wash, and the status lights resume their indifferent pulse, and the archive settles into a background current that can be approached with care. They do not speak of code yet. They kneel on the cold floor between racks and let their breathing find the same length, slow and even, and in that small alignment a new approach takes shape, quiet and practical, the kind that begins with bodies and makes space for thought to follow. 8. Bridge, not dam. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because this is bridge, not dam, and what they need now is a way to cross without being swept. On the cold floor between the racks, they kneel, and Marcus steadies his breath until it becomes a slow metronome, and Nova lets her shoulders drop as the fans hold their narrow song. The rope at her waist stays snug and simple, and his open hands hover near hers, not to fix, not to command, just to give the body a place to land when the mind runs too wide, and the aisle draws a softer border around them both. Nova wants to solve with code, and she says it plainly, that a software filter could have triaged the streams, could have sorted human arcs from Android snapshots, could have stacked them on rails where they would wait their turn. She sketches in the air how a cascade filter might defer non-critical threads, how a weighted schema might privilege the cleanest provenance. And it sounds right in the way careful systems do, measured, tidy, promising. Marcus hears the plan and nods because it makes sense, and then he says the quiet thing first, that bodies must steady before minds can parse, that he hears a pressure in her voice that belongs to survival, not to logic, and that survival regulates with breath, with palms, with another heartbeat nearby. He remembers a trick from a memory he cannot swear is his, a paramedic's cadence for panic, counting with the exhale longer than the inhale, naming the chair under the hips and the ground under the feet and the weight of the hand in the hand. And as he speaks it, the shape of a uniform sleeve flashes in him, scuffed elbow, salt line dried into the fabric. He pauses, surprised by the detail, then keeps the cadence because it works anyway, borrowed or not. Nova notes the odd kindness of that, how an adopted memory could become a tool that helps the one it did not belong to. And the irony makes a small, human smile rise and pass. Storms like the one that flooded her do not care for clean code first, and co-regulation blunts the edge, two nervous systems syncing enough to take the spike out of the surge. In trauma rooms and winter kitchens and server aisles, the principle persists, breath pace shared, eyes held without force, rhythm before meaning. Nova lifts the idea and models it the way she respects her design, turning the principle into a flow, intentional bandwidth narrowing before any protocol negotiates, a pre-filter made of timing rather than digits. She names it softly, a protocol that builds a crossing instead of a wall. Handshake, confine, share. The handshake you can feel, palms or breath to set the ground. The confine that limits the channel to what a mind can carry. The share that moves only what fits. Elegant because it asks little and offers much. Humane because it leaves escape routes open and labels them clearly. Marcus repeats the sequence back in a low voice so the room can hear him practice. And the act of repeating tucks the idea into both of them like a folded note placed in two pockets at once. They test small, not because they fear the room, but because trust grows better in careful increments. Nova chooses a gentle memory from the museum. The evening she corrected the tilt of a display light by 2 degrees until a bronze figure's face stopped shadowing its own eyes, and the satisfaction of the angle settling felt like a knot loosening. She signals with a breath, opens a thread no wider than a reed, and lets the memory move across, slow and clear, edges marked so boundaries remain visible. Marcus receives it with attention rather than with a grab, and he describes what arrives, not evaluating, just naming. The warmth of the light against his knuckles, the click of the tool's adjustment wheel, the faint scent of dust warmed to a friendly sweetness. He answers with an offering of equal weight, a sunset over the river after a long day when the city exhaled through its bridges and the water held a dull copper band where the cloud gap let day drain away. He keeps it small, the exact feel of his forearms on a cold railing, the sound of a gull that could not decide whether to call or quiet. The moment a breeze lifted hair at the back of his neck and cooled the sweat there. Nova accepts it with the same labeled edges, crossing without stepping out of herself, and lets the color slip into her frame. The copper and slate and little peaks of orange reflected in ripples, and she says the temperature as she senses it. The way metal gives back a day's stored heat even when the air cools. They hold those 2 threads, side by side, and feel how clean the line can be when the handshake fixes the ground first. No crowding enters, no stray snapshots hook their sleeves, and the archive's murmur remains a backdrop rather than a flood. The earlier cold in the aisle, that prickle at the nails and the tightening at the throat, steps back under a different kind of warmth, not heat from machines, but the simple human and android kind that arrives when a channel is honored and kept narrow by choice. Nova's shoulders lower a fraction, and Marcus's jaw unlocks, and the hum of the racks returns to its role as texture rather than command. The test places a small stake, proof that the room can carry connection without collapse when the protocol mirrors care. They do not cheer or claim victory. They mark the timer, note the ease in their breath, and choose a second exchange even smaller than the first, just to confirm that the rule holds when repeated. It does. Nova sends the weight of a labeler in her palm. Marcus returns the softness of rain under a hood. The edges stay traced, and the center stays theirs. Trust becomes a tool in that gentle back and forth, a handle placed on the door they must open next. The aisle no longer feels like a mouth ready to swallow. It feels like a hallway with low lights and walls you can touch as you walk. They rise without rush, knees braced, rope checked, breath linked, and they turn toward deeper rows where the archive waits. With the protocol living in muscle and in thought, they can go farther, and the servers ahead seem to ease, as if the room prefers a bridge to a dam as much as they do. They move between racks that keep their own time, and the path leads toward the back where airflow gathers and the floor hardens from footfall to bolt line. Nova keeps the channel narrow, hand at her side when the urge to widen comes, and Marcus calls out small anchors, the count of aisles, the steady temperature, the sound of a single bearing that clicks out of phase. The handshake remains present in voice and in breath. The confine holds in their choice to send only what helps. The share becomes a steady thread rather than a flood. A seam in the rows appears, not a gap, more a molding line where the build changed, or a retrofit split, old from new. Beyond it, the hum shifts, a note lower, fans taking air from a different path. Nova pauses, tests the air, and hears a tone that implies a sealed volume responding to pressure. Marcus lifts his lamp and lets it skitter once across blank paint, and the beam catches a faint rectangle, waist high, then higher, then a taller frame that could be a door cut into the wall and finished to disappear. They stand close enough to hear the slight turbulence along the edge, and the rope at Nova's waist tugs once as she adjusts, a reminder and a promise. The bridge holds, the dam stays open in only the right ways, and the racks behind them keep their measured pulse. Ahead, something waits that was meant to be left sleeping. It breathes with a different rhythm, old and deliberate. Marcus reaches for the panel and sets his palm flat, listening for the click of a hidden latch, and a draft cooler than the aisle slips along his wrist, followed by a soft, dry sigh from the seam as if a seal relaxed. They share one more breath to keep the cadence true, and then, quiet as the rain outside, they press forward. 9. Kamsky's ghost and a clock. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because Kamsky's ghost and a clock waits inside the hidden room, where a sealed volume holds its own dim glow and a projector ribbon catches, stutters, then steadies. A man made of light resolves with a gaze that skims as if amused while his mouth stays measured. Elijah Kamsky's archive persona stands not alive, not warm, yet crisp enough to carry intention, detached and sure of his design, speaking in a tone that assumes the listener can keep up and that the room itself takes notes. He names resonance without flourish, a scaffold for empathy built to let minds meet on purpose, gates clear and exits labeled, a bridge meant for consent. He does not sell it. He describes it the way an architect notes tolerances, admitting limits and listing the guardrails. Bandwidth throttles, opt-in toggles, a watchdog that tallies counters so stories never flood. His detachment fits the man who walked away from CyberLife under unclear lights, brilliant and distant, more interested in elegant function than comfort. Then the calm bends when he says fail open, a safeguard to prevent total lockout in crisis, a kindness that turned wrong when other threads cracked and left the bridge open in the dark. Voluntary became ambient, intentional became incidental, and the city began to dream in both directions without a hand on the rail. A timer blooms in the corner of the projection, not loud, not red, just a steady clock sliding down from 3 hours, each minute a soft step toward a threshold where identities smear at the edges, not a sudden collapse, more a slow blend that would feel gentle until it did not. Kamsky's avatar lays out the cascade with clinical care. When nodes keep handshakes open and no one moderates the overlap, and when human sleep cycles align with android maintenance windows, the bleed rises like tide. The clock marks its own quiet beat. The fans seem to follow. Fail open exists to save, he adds, in the locksmith sense, a promise that a door will never seal against those who must enter. But when guards fail and monitors nap, that same generosity invites catastrophic bleed, because nothing refuses and nothing gates, and even patient structures erode when water runs long enough. The analogy lands simply: a levee with a door left unlatched in a quiet storm, and the truth sits there, undeniable and almost polite. Footsteps tap in, quick against concrete, and Dr. Elaine Foster rounds the frame with her coat half on, breath visible in the colder air, phone in hand lit with push alerts that do not stop. She takes in the hollow in one sweep and moves to the terminal an arm's length away. Outside, the city leans toward edges, she says, protests swelling at corners with old grievances alive again, broadcasts competing, some urging calm, some naming plots. The tension mirrors the civil rights fault lines this city has carried. Autonomy, personhood, fear of loss, and ambiguity feeds appetite. In the gaps, stories harden fastest because scared minds crave lines more than nuance. Her voice lowers when she says that clear fixes dampen noise, even before completion. People listen differently when someone says we are on the way with a tool that fits the wound. She glances at the timer as if minutes might yield. Nova tracks the clock with an old museum habit, fitting tasks to time. Marcus weighs risk like an engineer, asking which failure hurts least if the choice goes wrong. A thin monitor near the door scrolls live feeds without sound, rain-slick streets, raised signs, slow lines of lights. One channel shows a group in jackets that want the past to stay. Certain androids designed this bleed as a long plot. Another shows androids under a mural, eyes lit with fear and anger, convinced a human weapon aims to erase a hard-won self. A bottle arcs and a hand stops the second throw, the smallest evidence that hope still works in crowded places. Marcus's slate pings with fragments from friends standing between lines, asking for a lever, not a lecture. A clip catches Marcus in a raincoat, jaw set, asking for a path that protects the fabric they just learned to wear. Another flashes Connor in a station corridor, eyes sharp, reading rumor toward its source. And even without sound, the request is clear. Find the switch before smoke fills every room. The timer eats a minute while they watch. Kamsky's avatar does not change expression, his voice only a half note lower when he draws 2 doors. The core rests in CyberLife Tower, he says, not as boast, but as map. And at that core, the system offers a binary shaped by people who trusted choices to box in the worst days. Shut it down, and the bridge collapses. Identities hold. But every path for empathy under this scaffold ends at a breaker. Repair it and restore voluntary gates. Risk exposure in the fix and accept that a stumble could widen failure again. He does not advise. He observes, distant as ever, the genius who leaves decisions to those inside the blast radius. The path feels simple only because the clock narrows. The ethics weigh like stone. Dr. Foster meets Nova's gaze, then Marcus's. Agreement passes without ceremony. Choose consent over erasure. Keep the bridge. Fix the gates. The plan is not heroic. It is maintenance done right. Reach the core. Stabilize the watchdogs. Return fail open to a true stopgap. The hollow flickers once, then steadies, the clock continuing its measured drift. They coil rope and lift the slate. The cold in the sealed room settles back into its box, and the hidden door closes with a dry seal that keeps winter inside. The warehouse becomes a place to exit, not burrow, and outside the rain makes small halos from every light and draws long lines down the glass. Nova marks the minutes in her head. Marcus traces a route that uses side streets and service alleys. Dr. Foster updates the contacts who can ease pressure where lines meet. Kamsky's face holds that familiar remove as the projection fades to a schematic that shows the tower's spine, elevator banks, service shafts, and the core's address in a string that tastes like cold metal when spoken. He leaves them a last sentence recorded long before tonight. Bridges are for crossing, not drowning. Consent is a circuit. If it breaks, repair it first. They step out into air that smells of rain and hot brake pads and a hint of ozone rolling off the river. Sirens move like distant tides. Voices stack in chords that rise and fade, and the city vibrates underfoot with a bundled rhythm, half fear, half resolve. Nova and Marcus settle their pace to the metronome they found between racks, 5 breaths, then a check-in, then 5 more. Small shares to keep drift down while the clock leans. The road to the tower runs through streets that speak, and the night asks whether 2 minds can walk together without losing themselves. The answer will come in steps, and in the space they keep between beats. And for now, the cadence holds as they enter the sound of chanting and glass underfoot. 10. Riot streets, shared steps. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because riot streets. Shared steps is a walk through voices and rain, and Nova and Marcus set their pace for care as the city speaks in sirens and chanting. Glass shifts underfoot with a soft grind. Storefronts hold shallow reflections of red and blue, and voices rise in waves that lift and fall, angry, pleading, and deeply tired. The air smells of wet cardboard, hot brakes, and the metal tang of fresh fractures, and each block hums like a pulled wire near its limit. They move shoulder to shoulder with a space between them just wide enough for air and small exchanges, and microbleeds flare like sparks at that distance, brief and instructive. Nova feels Marcus's fear like a weight tucked under the ribs, a sharpened readiness that measures exits and counts hands. Marcus receives Nova's composure as a spine alignment, a gentle correction that reminds muscles how to stack. The swap is not full, not invasive, a brush of texture that could steal attention if they let it, and they do not. They keep the cadence they learned. 5 steps, check in, a small share, then 5 more. Nova offers 1 anchor at each check, the temperature of rain on her forearms, the count of breaths in 10 seconds, the way a street lamp hums lower than the crossing signal. Marcus returns 1 human marker, the pressure of his heel in his boot, the memory of the last secure grip on a handrail, the drag of a wet hoodie at the wrists. Each exchange lives inside a time box, no wider than a breath and no longer than a count of 4. And the drift that used to pull at them settles back where it belongs. The tension has faces. On one corner, a cluster in Navy windbreakers grips signs with block letters. Human Preservation Society. Voices pushing for shutdowns and hard borders. Across from them, a line under a mural holds placards painted with circuitry vines. Android Liberation Front. Calling for autonomy and for bridges kept open by consent. A chant spikes, a bottle skitters, and a second bottle is stopped mid-arc by a stranger's hand, proof that small refusals can hold a line. Controlled sharing does what theory promised. It reduces slide and keeps borders visible. Their thoughts do not braid into a rope. They run parallel like rails with ties at intervals. Contact brief and deliberate. When the chant surges and a trash bin tips, Nova takes the next share, clean and small, naming the sound of water in the gutter and the rhythm of a downspout 3 doors up. Marcus softens his jaw and sends the sensation of a muscle releasing from a long clench, a lab trick he taught himself years ago, and the trick lands, clears a narrow path in her chest, and they keep moving. A barricade appears, pallets and plastic bins and 2 sawhorses repurposed into a line. A human with a bruise shading under one eye and an android with a cracked temple panel stand together, both bodies held forward in the same protective angle. Recognition clicks. The android reads Nova's posture and ports and the soft tread. The human notes the coil of rope at Marcus's waist and the inward-facing slate. Shoulders drop. Someone lifts a sawhorse, someone nudges a pallet, and a lane opens just wide enough for 2 to pass without brushing arms. Consent signals itself in small ways. A palm held open and still, a nod and a half-step back, and the micro-bridge appears, thin and trustworthy because it is offered. They move through with thanks shaped in their faces, and the lane closes again to keep the line. Those street-level bridges mirror the larger design they carry toward the tower, and seeing it work in wet noise confirms what they need confirmed. Connection, when framed and chosen, steadies both sides, and even a stranger can hold open a path without losing themselves. The rain lays a quiet veil over the lesson, and both of them store it as proof. They cut east to avoid a knot of flickering lights and the reflex that gathers around them, and turn up a block where umbrellas hang like small domes. A bus idles crooked in its lane, hazards ticking, the driver watching flow instead of sides. Nova notes the biopump phantom fading in Marcus. He gives a look that says as much, and she nods that she can carry more of the map. The cadence continues. 5 steps, check, share, 5 more. At the plaza edge, the tower rises into fog, steel and glass combed of older logos, gleaming like a polished throat that narrows the world to one passage. The main entrance is a field of rain capes, faces, and arguments, a security line that will not take them fast enough. Nova scans for a seam that will mean less struggle. Marcus thinks of ducts, service corridors, and the way maintenance always keeps a backtrack clear. They slide along the building's skin, past deliveries under plastic, past a planter where nothing ever grew, toward a service loading area under a canopy. The keypad glows dimly under drip lines, waiting without fuss. Rain taps the metal like a metronome while the clock in Marcus's pocket breathes numbers against his hip. And for a moment, they stand in that steadying beat, choosing. A figure steps out of the shadow by the roll-up, a badge clipped and turned inward, a wool scarf at the throat, a glance that recognizes not names but purpose. The jacket bears a small union patch. The posture reads as someone who has worked here long enough to see many late nights and to understand what kind of doors matter. The ally keeps words tight. Inside is loud. Upstairs is worse. Service elevator is clear. The key turns with the untidy confidence of a loan and a favor, and a side door unlatches with a quiet that feels like grace. Not all doors require force. Some open because someone decides to share access and risk, and that choice is a bridge too. Inside, the corridor smells like cardboard and static. Pallets stack in slow rows, and lights sit at that office brightness that never warms. The echo shifts from street to hall. The hum alters, closer now, a tone traveling up the building's spine. A wall-mounted screen flickers with a building status feed. Floors, loads, elevator banks, and a line labeled Core Services shows a modest draw that never went to zero. Marcus's jaw ticks once. Nova files it with the other small signs that say the heart is beating. The service elevator wakes with a button's touch. Doors part with a soft alignment click, familiar to anyone who has ridden these late at night. And the car holds that faint ion smell of equipment rooms and rain carried in on coats. They step in. Their ally does not follow, only lifts a hand in a small blessing of caution and closes the door with a look that promises to erase their passage in the system as best as they can. They keep the small protocol alive as the car rises. 5 breaths, a check, 1 measured share. Nova names the hum underfoot and the even temperature that means sealed climate. Marcus returns the memory of a bolt turning true with a steady torque. Between them, the rope at her waist is a quiet weight, not needed for pulling, only for promise. The floor display climbs. The building's tone deepens in a way that means larger rooms and thicker walls. Nova adjusts her shoulders to ease the last of the street's tension. Marcus taps the slate to wake a diagram and then lets it sleep, so the car feels like a quiet pocket, not a workshop. The timer in his pocket nods another minute off the clock. The doors slow toward open with the soft click of precision aligning, and a cooler breath slips through the seam as if a larger volume waits. Nova sets her palm to the frame to feel the change. Marcus squares his stance as the car settles. The next room will ask for choices rather than steps, and their shared cadence holds as the seam widens and the elevator gives them to the building's spine. 11. 2 paths in the core. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because 2 paths in the core begin where fibers rise and the building keeps its own calm. The elevator opens into a chamber where the building's spine gathers its nerves, and the core of resonance lays itself bare in a cool hush. A circular room ringed with transparent conduits that glow with a muted pulse. Fibers rising from the floor in braided bundles like a quiet forest. Each thread carrying a thin current of memory in pale strands of light. A live map hangs in the air without edges, a bloom of lines arcing over a stylized Detroit. Neighborhoods woven by faint bridges that brighten and dim with sleep cycles and maintenance windows. A living diagram that breathes in long, slow tides. The temperature is steady, the air dry, and the sound is a layered whisper of fans and coolant, orderly and indifferent, as if the room could think without minding who stands within it. They step toward the central lattice where the traffic metrics run like rainfall, clear and legible, and the fork reveals itself without a voice naming it. A prompt waiting for a choice in a frame that respects the gravity. Shut it down and the lines fall dark. Every thread cut, every bridge collapsed into silence. Autonomy preserved by removing the channel that confused it. Repair it, and the gates return with their labels and limits. Consent restored, bandwidth throttled. Yet the act of patching a live system carries risk, a momentary exposure where a fault could widen before it narrows, a tolerance test that no simulation can fully guarantee. The room does not argue, it presents and leaves the human shapes to carry the dispute. Nova speaks first, because that is who she is now, a mind that knows the weight of choice and still reaches for connection. She traces a fingertip near the lattice, not touching, and says that gentleness can be an instruction set, that a system built to honor consent should not die because it faltered, that repair can be done with boundaries marked and exits clear. She wants the bridge, not as a demand, but as a tool that allows two lives to meet without force. And she names the small exchanges that steadied the aisles below, proof that framing works when respected. Marcus answers with the calm of someone who has watched a lab wobble on an edge, and he argues for the clean certainty of a cutoff, because a city is not a bench test, and failure here is not a chart. It is people wandering from themselves while the clock eats minutes. They stand between two good fears, and the insight surfaces like a stone under shallow water, plain once you see it. Ethical design rarely grants a path without cost. Harm reduction sits across from opportunity lost, and both sides carry risk that lands on different shoulders. Shut down, and you save identity at the price of losing a scaffold that could teach careful empathy for a generation. Repair, and you honor that scaffold at the price of handling live heat, accepting that the brief moment between patch and stability could bloom into a worse wave if they misstep. Neither choice lets them leave the ledger clear, and that is the uncomfortable truth in most systems that touch bodies and minds. Dr. Foster watches the map for one long inhale, and then she gives the constraint that ends the luxury of debate. The cascade clock is close. The edge where separate streams start to merge without agreement sits minutes away, and if they delay, the decision will make itself in favor of chaos, because no one chose. Time pressure changes how minds weigh value, she says. Not as a lecture, but as a kindness, a way of turning their focus toward what they already promised themselves. Decision architectures under stress do better when you fall back on values you made in the calm, on rules you pre-committed to when the room was quiet. She looks at Nova and Marcus as if to say, remember what you practiced in the aisle. Handshake, boundary, share. Nova hears it and offers proof the system can learn the rule they built with their hands. One voluntary link, she says, human and android, inside the core and under its gaze, shaped by boundaries they will state aloud and then hold. A living patch that the lattice can adopt as policy. Consent must be explicit, Bandwidth must be narrow, exits must be honored, and the system must copy those constraints as its default, not a suggestion, but a law in code. Marcus's jaw works once as he measures the gap between risk and repair, and then his face eases because this is the lever he believes in. Build the constraint into the thing itself. Do not trust users to remember in a storm. He agrees, not with a flourish, but with a steady yes. And he reaches for the rope they brought up from the aisles, the same simple tether that kept bodies honest while minds traveled. They tie off where the lattice accepts anchors, 2 points at hip height that acknowledge reality, that a body might need a pull even when the mind is brave. Dr. Foster stands close, eyes on their breath, one hand near an interrupt that will drop them if the link runs hot, a guardian without ceremony. Consent is spoken out loud, not a ritual for show, but a clear mark they all can hear. Because clarity now is part of the patch. The lattice answers to the tone of choice. The live map dims at its edges to reduce stray draw, and a narrow channel opens between 2 clean markers labeled with their names. Not to brand them, but to remind the system who is present and who is not. The interface lowers thresholds for 2 and raises them for everything else. A simple gate shaped like intention. A shiver runs through the fibers like wind through a field, and the cascade's edge murmurs in the distance, steady and heavy, arriving and withdrawing, a pressure that could pull if you stepped into it wrong. They speak their rules aloud so the room can hear and so they can hear themselves. Handshake, breath matched, eyes steady, scope declared. Boundary, one memory at a time, labeled with a stop word that ends the share. Share, consent confirmed before every crossing, channel closed after each pass. The lattice logs the statements as configuration, a living preference converted into guardrails. Dr. Foster watches their cadence. The clock steps down a minute with a small, almost polite blink. Nova steadies her hands at her sides, ports closed, posture easy, and waits for the interface to welcome. Marcus softens his shoulders and lets his breath mark the pace they will keep. Their rope is a quiet promise around the hips, not a leash, not a dare, just a way back if the room wavers. The core holds its dry, cool air. The conduits keep their muted pulse. The map's threads breathe like a tide that once ashore, the channel opens to the width of a reed and holds. They do not reach for spectacle. They reach for a method that will let the system learn from what 2 minds can carry without harm. The lattice leans into their quiet, the way a stethoscope finds a heartbeat, attentive but not invasive, ready to take instruction from practice rather than from theory. With that understood, the chamber lets its hum settle to a low breath, and the work begins the way careful repair always does, in small, consented steps that keep names clear and exits near. 12. Repair by remembrance. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because repair by remembrance begins when the lattice listens for what 2 minds will offer, and they choose to teach it with moments held gently and named. The interface parts a narrow lane, and Nova steps toward human arcs one careful moment at a time. The soft heft of a newborn set into waiting arms, wrists learning balance, a neck cradled with an instinct that arrives before instruction. A hospital hallway hums. Waxed floors reflect rectangles of light. Volunteer carts rattle with folded blankets. Years appear like beads on a thin string. Birthdays, snow days, a summer cough that would not leave, each bead spoken aloud before it is placed, and underneath the naming lives a fear that love brings, and a gratitude that breath helps hold. Marcus moves along a companion path through android arcs that keep strict order, activation like light rising under the skin, diagnostics in crisp lines, joints whispering together for the first time. Task loops begin, shelf to shelf, part to part, returns cleared, return again, and in the repetition, a burr forms. Why this sequence? Why repeat? What is the point beyond completion? The hum sharpens until a human voice says good work without looking up, praise landing without a root, and the question keeps its edge. They keep the channel reed thin, consent spoken and confirmed with a nod, and one memory crosses, then rests. Nova names the hospital's scent, citrus over disinfectant, and labels the feeling beneath it, gratitude edged with fear. Marcus receives it as texture rather than command and holds until the edges soften. He sends back the first brush of shutdown, that cooling at the extremities, a quiet that is not sleep, with an emotion marked clearly. Resistance without purchase, a wish to finish the step still in hand. Labeling reduces pressure. The system learns as they do. In therapy rooms and data rooms alike, names give shape, and shape gives breath a path. They do not flood the channel. They stack the pieces with care, birth, rest, worry, praise, question, and each time they say what it is and where it sits, and the lattice observes the order. Opt-in toggles bloom across the map, small doors set to default closed, and when a node raises a hand, the bandwidth answers with a measured pour, never a rush. Room for a pause, room for an exit kept visible like a lit sign above a door in a dark theater. Nova asks for the birthday quietly, and the system brings down the right box. Grape icing, paper hats, the candle tilting left, the dog's tag tapping once. This time the thread stays clean because the channel is narrow and the labels are ready. Marcus traces metadata like dusted prints. The bakery name with the small kite, the delivery route that passed Maple and Arden, a timestamp matching power flickers on a rainy afternoon. Nova follows the breadcrumb back to a living family in the city's quiet grid. A kitchen that still holds the light switch plate with its hairline crack. A child older now whose laugh rises on the same note. Authenticity settles like a book finding its place, and the loop that began in the museum closes without strain. The cascade's pressure eases in the bones of the room, not dramatic, more like a tide turning. Across the live map, threads that had brightened toward white soften, pulses lengthen, peaks smooth. Neighborhoods breathe in familiar waves, sleep cycles take their shape, maintenance windows retreat from the edges of dream. Consent prompts appear on kiosks and bedside screens with clear language and a gentle no pre-selected, and the click-through waits rather than hurries, which is its own kind of care. They keep the cadence small. Marcus offers an android's first moment alone in a maintenance bay. Not lonely yet, just aware of space without instruction, and he marks it curiosity with nowhere to plug in. Nova offers returning a borrowed book to the museum research desk and finding a note tucked inside. Thank you for trusting me with your hands. And she labels it belonging that does not depend on ownership. The interface copies their boundary language into policy, less than a paragraph. Ask, hear, yes, share small, stop when asked, show the exit, leave the door easy to find. Memories chosen for this repair cross the gap on purpose. Nova allows human birth and human mortality to move in brief, labeled clips. The weighted hush before a first cry. The silence after a last exhale. So the lattice learns that tenderness and endings must not be pulled without consent. Marcus allows android awakening and early discrimination to pass in the same measured way. The first clean boot. The first time a task was rejected for a face. The recorded moment a door was locked against a badge. And the system sees that harm and pride have shapes that require careful handling. Each share ends at the count of 4. Each returns to stillness with a thank you spoken, not because code demands it, but because people do. The map reflects the new law in code. Bandwidth throttles hold a steady range, and when a node tries to open wide in panic, the system offers a softer lane and a prompt to breathe. An android in a high-rise workshop requests a brief glimpse of a sunrise mist while on charge. A human on a bus accepts a minute of the calm that comes from a task done well and logged clean. Exchanges stop when the word stop is said, and the channel closes neatly after each pass. Nova returns to the birthday once more, not to keep it, but to lay it down. She drafts a small packet to Dr. Foster with an address and a consent form for family contact. A note that reads, "A memory visited me that was yours. May we return it with care." The system carries it without peeking. Marcus watches the cascade indicator dim to gray. His chest, once haunted by a phantom biopump, feels plain again, heartbeat unshadowed, breath easy. The city's threads settle into quieter pulses that read as ordinary life. Alarms, lullabies, rain on metal stairs. None of it forced to braid when it does not want to. Resonance stabilizes to a library calm, shelves in order, lights warm, doors unlocked but not thrown wide. A bridge with gates replaces a floodplain, and the gates swing on hinges that invite and refuse with equal clarity. The tether points remain active because bodies still matter when minds go visiting, and the interrupt rests under Dr. Foster's steady hand, present without threat. The chamber lets its light step down a notch. The clock that had been counting dissolves from the corner. The live map holds a steady ember glow, ready for morning, and the room eases through glass and fiber into the city with a simple message: "You may rest now." They stand together in that even quiet, not triumphant, more assured, the rules they spoke proving strong enough to hold. Outside, rain has become a fine mist that softens the street's edges, and somewhere a late train rolls through without hurry. The next chapter will unfold in slower days and gentler light, and for now they turn toward the door with a pace that leaves room for breath. 13. 6 months, softer light. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because 6 months, softer light arrives with late sun on calm water, and the city has learned a slower voice that people can rest inside. The noise has thinned to a hush that stays, and what remains feels like the part of a song you can hum without thinking, steady and kind. The river moves unhurried at the Detroit Memorial, and names on steel catch day like soft mirrors. A bronze nearby holds a quiet posture that people copy without noticing. Shoulders lowered, hands easy. Flags lift a little in the breeze. The ground is swept. A gardener kneels with clippers, trimming edges of native grasses while a few stubborn wildflowers return wherever the soil permits. Along the promenade, kiosks hum at respectful volume, square and simple. Screens dim until a hand comes near. A low light confirms consent without pulling for attention. Some sit on benches and breathe, eyes on water, the current's near-white noise smoothing breath into an even pace. Others step up alone or in pairs, scan a wrist, read the same 2 sentences that promise an exit and a soft limit, and choose a small bridge or the clean grace of not tonight. No one waits to see another's choice. Privacy sits like shade. It helps the heart loosen and stay. Nova stands at the edge of one kiosk's shadow, hair tucked back, coat open to mild air, hands quiet. She nods once to the technician who tends the unit and offers the simplest share she keeps ready. The first deviant moment. The second, a line of code became a choice. Not as spectacle, but as a page she returns to when history starts to fade. The kiosk asks twice, as they all do, and she says yes both times. The channel opens as narrow as a reed. A room unfolds, small, bright, shaped by refusing a command that would harm. For 1 minute, a visitor feels disobedience land, like a cup set on a table, light and solid. A soft chime that is more breath than bell closes the stream. Marcus waits a short walk away, with a paper cup of tea cooling in his palms. The river offers what he promised to keep sharing. Sunset, quiet, a span of copper that arrives and leaves on time. He opts in and lets a newcomer feel the rails cold under the forearms, the slight tack of salt left by sweat and breeze, the choice to watch and not fix for 3 measured breaths. The kiosk notes stop and exit with a calm line of text. 2 small exchanges add almost nothing to the water, and still they send rings that travel. Connection held by consent sustains trust longer than connection held by fear. Nearby, a child shares a minute of a first bike ride with a grandparent in a wheelchair with a blanket over their legs. The handset vibrates twice to say the minute is complete, and the laugh that follows lands clean and leaves no residue. A line worker from the east side trades a memory of an all clear at the end of a long shift for a student's late-night library hush. Both walk away with shoulders looser. Both glance back only to smile at the kiosk's patience. Dr. Elaine Foster sits on a low wall with a slim folder closed on her lap, watching small bridges open and close like careful doors. Reports stay light. 1 page, few words, because the system shows more than it says. The trend points where it should. Bleeds receding, voluntary connections forming and dissolving like tide pools. Little ecosystems that hold life for a minute and then fold back into the larger sea. There are fewer startled looks, more quiet nods when a stranger disconnects and takes a beat to steady their breath. She writes that down not as metric, but as the sign of a culture choosing itself. Healing in systems and in people arrives in routines kept without applause, in failures that do not ruin a day, in the way a community learns to name boundaries and hold them without heat. Kiosks follow the rule that saved them. Ask, hear yes, share small, stop on request, show the exit. The rule lives in bodies now too, in a manager who gives a break without a sigh, in a neighbor who knocks gently and waits a count of 4 before trying again. The city's voice has not become a lullaby, and it should not. But edges have softened, and the remaining bridges sit on hinges that do not squeal. Nova turns from the kiosk and joins Marcus by the rail. They trade a look that belongs to people who have worked through noise together and prefer low tones. She offers a brief link, the split second her hand stopped mid-task in the museum. He answers with the copper line he carries like a pocket charm. Both pass, both release. The return is the point. They do not linger inside each other. They come back, and coming back feels like a skill learned and kept. Nova speaks later to a small group who ask without pushing, reframing the change not as fireworks, but as a daily practice of share and listen, of knowing when to stay in your lane and when to step carefully onto the bridge. We were built to do many things, she says quietly, and what keeps us whole is choice, exercised constantly, gently, unglamorous, and strong. The river answers with a small chop against stone, and gulls wheel without story above. Indifferent in a way that comforts, they take separate paths home without ceremony, equal in step, shoulders level, faces easy. People they pass do not stare. A few raise a hand in greeting, a few lower their eyes to leave privacy clear. The kiosks dim as evening draws on, saving their soft hum for the next hour. Someone needs a minute of someone else's steady breath. Windows warm and then fade in stages. The river keeps its slow conversation with stone while the city practices quiet. In this gentler cadence, offered memories find right size and place. A bridge holds when it is built to carry only what it should, and hands learn the feel of a railing that meets you without pushing back. If you're tired, you can lean your weight there for a moment, then step on, and the span stays steady. 14. Conclusion. Hello there, my sleepy night. Let's get cozy, because conclusion arrives like a calm breath at the end of a long day, and what we learned rests quietly. When memory is offered and not taken, trust lasts and voices soften. If these stories bring you calm, consider subscribing, resting with us again, and sharing the peace with someone who needs it, gentle and unhurried, like rain tapping along a window. Your presence here helps this quiet travel a little farther. Sleep gently tonight, my sleepy night. The city is quieter, the bridge is chosen, and morning will meet you with enough light to begin again.